God went completely silent at the exact moment you needed him most. And I know that broke something in you. I know you spent nights talking to a ceiling that felt like concrete. I know you asked the same question in 100 different ways. Why won't you answer me? And every morning you woke up to the same unbearable quiet. But what if I told you that the silence was never what you thought it was? What if I told you that the moment God stopped answering you was the same moment he started doing the most important work of your entire life? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is going to reframe every painful thing that has ever happened to you. And by the end of this, you are not going to feel abandoned anymore. You are going to feel chosen. There is a specific kind of loneliness that only certain people understand. It is not the loneliness of being alone in a room. It is the loneliness of being in a room full of people who are laughing, connecting, moving easily through their lives, and you are standing right there in the middle of it, watching it happen and feeling completely, utterly invisible. You have felt that, not once, not twice. You have felt that so many times that at some point you stopped being surprised by it and started wondering if something was fundamentally wrong with you. And then, because you are the kind of person you are, you brought that question to God. You got on your knees, you opened your Bible, you prayed with more sincerity than most people will ever give to anything in their lives. You fasted, you waited, you believed, you told yourself it was coming. You held on when everything in your circumstances was telling you to let go. And then the silence came, not immediately. It crept in slowly, the way cold does through a poorly insulated room. First, the prayers felt hollow. Then the scriptures stopped landing the way they used to. Then you started wondering if the whole thing, the faith, the believing, the waiting, was a story you had been telling yourself to cope with a life that wasn't going the way you planned. That is the moment I want to talk to you about, not the moment before the silence, not the moment after it breaks. I want to talk to you about the silence itself, what was actually happening inside it, why it was allowed, and what it means about who you are and where you are going. Because what was happening during that silence was not what you think. Section 2, the thing nobody tells you about chosen people. There is something about your life that has always been slightly off script. You sensed this before anyone told you. You knew from a young age that you were not going to follow the path that everyone else seemed to be following automatically. The conventional milestones, the expected timelines, the standard blueprint for what a successful, stable life looks like. Something in you always knew that your story was going to be different. You just didn't know how different, and you definitely didn't know how much it was going to cost. Here is the thing that nobody tells people like you. The ones who are being prepared for something genuinely significant are almost always the ones who spend the longest time in the wilderness. Not a few months, not a season. I'm talking about years. Years of confusion, years of delay. Years of watching people who seem less serious, less spiritually awake, less genuinely committed to something real, watching those people move into their blessings while you are still waiting, still praying, still wondering what it is you're doing wrong. And you have tried to figure it out. You have examined yourself. You have repented of things you're not even sure were sins. You have questioned your calling, your sanity, and your worthiness more times than you can count. You have had entire seasons where you convinced yourself that you were the problem, that there was something defective in you that was keeping your breakthrough from arriving. But I need you to hear this clearly. That was not what was happening. What was happening was preparation. What was happening was construction. What was happening behind the scenes, beneath the silence, in the invisible architecture of your destiny, Was God building something in you that could not be built quickly, could not be rushed, and absolutely could not be built while you were comfortable? You felt it, but you could never put it into words. You knew your pain had a purpose. You just couldn't see the purpose clearly enough to make the pain feel worth it. That is about to change. Section 3. Why the silence came when it did. I want you to think back to the moment the silence started. Not the very beginning, go back further. Go back to the season right before the silence. What was happening in your life? What were you asking for? What were you believing for? What were you on the edge of stepping into? I'm willing to bet that right before the silence, something was shifting. You could feel it. Your faith was sharpening. Your sense of purpose was clarifying. You were starting to understand something about yourself and your calling that you hadn't understood before. You were getting close to something, and then the silence fell, and you interpreted that silence as rejection, as punishment, as God deciding at the worst possible moment to pull back and leave you alone in the dark. But here is what was actually happening. Here is the thing that completely reframes everything. In the ancient world, before a king's son was given authority, he was sent away. Not because he had failed, not because he was disqualified, but because authority of the kind he was about to carry required a formation that the palace could not provide. He needed to know what it felt like to be without resources. He needed to develop a character that comfort would have eroded. He needed to encounter his own weaknesses so thoroughly that he could never again be undone by them. The silence was not God stepping back from you. The silence was God stepping into the most intensive phase of your formation. The silence came when it did because you were finally ready for the kind of work that silence makes possible. The noise of answered prayer, of clear direction, of felt presence, that noise is beautiful, and it is real, and it is coming back to you. But there is a depth of character, a weight of wisdom, a quality of spiritual authority that can only be forged in the absence of those things. You were not being ignored. You were being formed. Section 4. Why people disappeared from your life. Around the time the silence started, or maybe slightly before it, or slightly after people started disappearing. Some left dramatically, some just drifted. Some were pulled away by circumstances that seemed random, but in retrospect feel surgical. People you thought were going to be in your corner forever. Friends you had trusted. Relationships you had invested in deeply. People who, when they left a hole so specific and so painful that you spent months trying to understand what you had done wrong. You need to hear this. You didn't do anything wrong. What happened is something that every chosen person experiences, and it is one of the most disorienting things you will ever go through. God was doing a strategic clearing of your environment, and he did it without asking your permission because he knew you wouldn't have agreed to it. Here's the thing about the people who were removed from your life. They were not bad people, necessarily. Some of them were genuinely good people who cared about you, but they were people whose presence in your life, at the level they were at, would have compromised the person you were being made into. Some of them would have talked you out of your calling, not maliciously, but because they loved the version of you they already knew, and they would have been uncomfortable with the version of you that was emerging. They would have questioned your decisions at exactly the moments when you needed to make them without question. They would have been anchors when you needed to move. Some of them would have benefited from your gifts in ways that would have depleted you. You are the kind of person who gives. You know this about yourself. You give deeply, generously, sometimes recklessly. And there were people in your life who had quietly positioned themselves to receive from you indefinitely, not because they were evil, but because you allowed it, because you believed in them, because you love people the way you do. And God could not let you carry those relationships into the next season of your life. The weight would have made the journey impossible. And some of them, and this one is the hardest to accept, some of them were simply not destined to go where you are going. Their lives are beautiful and their paths are real, but they lead somewhere different from where you are headed. And when two people are walking toward genuinely different destinations, eventually the paths diverge. Not because of fault, not because of failure, because of direction. The disappearances were not losses, they were releases. Section 5. The psychology of being prepared in private. There is something that happens to people who spend extended time in what feels like spiritual isolation. Something psychological that is actually a form of growth, even though it feels like deterioration. You stopped performing. Think about that for a moment. Before the silence, before the isolation, before the painful clearing of relationships and the drying up of visible progress, before all of that, there was a version of you that was partly shaped by other people's expectations. You prayed, and on some level you were aware of being the kind of person who prays. You served, and on some level you were aware of being the kind of person who serves. Your faith was real, but it was intertwined with an identity that was partially constructed for an audience. The silence stripped that away. When no one is watching, when nothing is visibly moving. When you keep showing up to your prayer life and your disciplines and your faith not because anyone will know about it, not because it is producing results you can point to, not because it is earning you any credit in any community. That is when what you actually believe gets separated from what you have been performing. And most people collapse at this stage. Most people decide that the silence means the whole thing was empty and they walk away, not out of weakness, but because they were never prepared for a faith that asks you to hold on in the dark. You are still here. You did not walk away. You are still showing up. You are still believing even when you can't explain why you're still believing. You are still in the conversation even when the conversation feels completely one-sided. That is not nothing. That is everything. Because what you are developing in this silence is the most valuable thing a person like you can possess. A conviction that is entirely your own. A faith that has been tested by absence and didn't shatter. A character that has been formed in private, which means it is deep enough to carry public weight. This is what others could not understand about why your journey looks the way it does. They see the delay. They see the quiet. They see a life that hasn't quite arrived yet. They don't see what's happening underneath, the structural reinforcement, the deepening of roots, the invisible but essential preparation that makes what's coming possible. Most people will never experience this kind of preparation because most people are not being prepared for what you're being prepared for. Section 6. Why you never fit in and what that actually means. Let's go back further. Back to before any of this, before the silence, before the isolation, before the painful things that shaped the adult version of you. You didn't fit as a child, did you? Not in the way that kids who are bullied don't fit, though maybe that was part of it. I mean something deeper. You always felt like you were operating on a different frequency than the people around you. You felt things more intensely. You perceived things that others seemed to miss entirely. You were drawn to questions that made the adults around you uncomfortable. You had a relationship with your own interior world that was richer and more complex than most people your age seem to have. You tried to hide it sometimes. You learned to code switch, to dumb yourself down, to translate the full complexity of what you were experiencing into a version that others could receive without pulling away from you. You became good at meeting people where they were, even when where they were felt like a long walk from where you actually lived. And you probably told yourself, for years, that there was something wrong with you, that the fact that you didn't fit was evidence of a deficit, not a distinction. Here is what was actually true. You were not designed to fit into the environment you came from. You were designed to change environments. You were built with a restlessness that would prevent you from settling too comfortably into any place that was smaller than your actual calling, not as a cruel trick, but as a navigational system. The discomfort of not belonging was not punishment. It was direction. Every time you felt out of place, something in you was being preserved. The parts of you that are most essential, your sensitivity, your depth, your capacity for perception, your hunger for something real, those parts cannot survive in every environment. And God, who knew what those parts were for, made sure that you could never get comfortable enough in the wrong places to stop looking for the right ones. Your inability to fit in was not a social failure. It was a divine firewall. And here is the part that explains so much of the specific pain you have carried. Because you never fully fit, you never fully belonged to any group or community that could have pulled you off course. You were kept slightly outside every circle, which meant that no circle could ever own you. And what that means is that when your moment comes, when the thing you were made for finally opens up in front of you, you will not be weighed down by loyalty to any camp, any faction, any community that would pull you back from it. You were kept free on purpose. Section 7, the major revelation. What the silence was actually building. I need to stop here because I want you to really receive what I'm about to say. Everything you have been through, the silence, the isolation, the delay, the not fitting, the people who left, the opportunities that fell apart at the last second, the prayers that went unanswered, the nights you can't talk about, the version of yourself you had to grieve when your life didn't go the way you believed it would, all of it was building something specific. Not just character in general, not just resilience in a vague sense, something specific. You are being built into a person who can carry weight that most people would be destroyed by. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that the thing you are being prepared for, the assignment, the calling, the purpose that has been hovering just outside the reach of your current circumstances, requires a person who has been tested in ways that most people have never been tested. It requires someone who has hit the bottom of their faith and survived it. Someone who has lost things they couldn't replace and learned to function anyway. Someone who has sat in the dark long enough that the dark no longer frightens them. Because the people you are going to help, the people whose lives your story is going to touch, the ones who will hear your voice or read your words or encounter your presence and feel for the first time in years that someone actually understands them, those people are in the dark right now. And they need someone who knows it from the inside. Not someone who read about it, not someone who visited it briefly and then escaped. Someone who lived there long enough to learn its geography. That is you. The very suffering you have wanted to escape, the suffering that has at times made you question whether any of this is real, whether God is there, whether your life means anything. That suffering is the most important qualification for the thing you were born to do. This is what completely reframes every painful chapter. The delay was not God withholding your blessing. The delay was God ensuring that when your blessing came, you would be someone who could steward it, someone who wouldn't be destroyed by it, Someone whose humility had been carved deep enough by suffering that the weight of influence or purpose or visibility wouldn't become the thing that corrupts you. Most people get their blessings before they have the character to hold them. And then they watch those blessings become disasters. You have watched that happen to people around you, haven't you? People who got everything they wanted too early and then lost it or became someone unrecognizable in the having of it. God was protecting you from that. The silence was mercy. Section 8. Why your prayers seem to fail. There is a specific prayer you prayed, a specific thing you believed for, a specific outcome that you poured your faith into so completely that when it didn't happen, it didn't just disappoint you. It shook something foundational in how you understood the relationship between faith and outcome. You prayed for that door to open and it stayed shut. You believed for that relationship to be restored and it ended instead. You stood in faith for that opportunity, that healing, that breakthrough, and what you got was not what you asked for. Sometimes you got the opposite. And the theology you had been taught did not know what to do with that, because the theology you had been given was built on a transaction model. You believe, you obey, God delivers, and your life was not following that model, which meant that either the theology was incomplete or you were the problem. You spent years assuming you were the problem. You weren't. The theology was incomplete. Here is what the silence taught you, even if you haven't fully articulated it yet. God is not running a wish fulfillment service. He is running a kingdom. And in a kingdom, the assignments are given not to the people who want them most, but to the people who have been prepared most thoroughly to carry them with integrity. Which means that sometimes, and this is the part that is hardest to hear, sometimes the prayer that goes unanswered is the most loving response God can give. Because the thing you were asking for would have taken you to a destination that looked good on the surface, but would have cost you the deeper thing. The relationship you prayed to restore, had it been restored at that moment, with both of you in the condition you were in, would have eventually broken you both in ways that distance and time are actually healing. The door that stayed shut was shut, because walking through it would have led you into a room where you would have gotten comfortable and stopped moving toward the place you were actually meant to reach. You asked for a blessing. God gave you a detour, and the detour felt like punishment. But the detour was the route all along. This is what others could not understand about your life. They looked at the closed doors and saw failure. They looked at the unanswered prayers and saw a person who was maybe not as spiritual, not as favored, not as blessed as they had seemed. They couldn't see what you are now beginning to see, that every detour was a precise correction, navigating you around dangers you didn't know were there, toward a destination that could not have been reached by the more obvious roads. Section 9. The weight you carry and why you carry it. I want to talk about something that you have probably never had words for. There is a weight that you carry, not the weight of your problems. That's different. This is a weight that feels almost like a responsibility, a seriousness, a knowing that something is at stake in your life in ways that go beyond the ordinary stakes of daily existence. You feel it in quiet moments. You feel it when you sense that your life is supposed to mean something specific. You feel it when you watch people suffer, and something in you responds not just with compassion, but with a deep, almost aching conviction that you are supposed to be part of the solution to that suffering. Most people don't carry that weight. Most people live well and meaningfully without feeling that specific gravity pressing on them. And sometimes you have envied them, their lightness, their ability to simply be in their lives without the constant pull of something larger that you can't quite see or name. But here is what that weight actually is. It is your calling, pressing in on you from the inside, trying to get out. And the reason it feels like weight rather than excitement is that the container, your current life, your current circumstances, your current level of formation, is not yet wide enough to hold it comfortably. The calling is real, and it is substantial, and it is pressing against limits that are still in the process of being expanded. That is why the waiting feels so specifically agonizing. It is not just the waiting of wanting something and not having it. It is the waiting of knowing that something is alive inside you that needs to be expressed, and watching the clock move, and wondering when the space for it will finally open. It is opening. I need you to hear that. What you are feeling is not the sensation of something dying. It is the sensation of something that is becoming too large for its current container. And that pressure, uncomfortable as it is a sign that you are on the edge of expansion. The weight you carry is not a burden. It is a signal. Section 10. What envy reveals about your anointing. Have you noticed that certain people don't like you and you're not entirely sure why? Have you walked into rooms and felt a shift in energy, a subtle but unmistakable change in how people are relating to you without having done anything to earn it? Have you had people who barely know you behave toward you with an inexplicable coldness or resistance? Have you had people try to diminish you, undermine you, or position you as less than you are, people who, on the surface, have no obvious reason to do so? You felt it, but could never put it into words. Here is the word, anointing. There is something on your life that is detectable to certain people before they can explain why they're detecting it. Something that reads as a threat to those who are operating from a place of insecurity or spiritual opposition. Something that makes those people want to diminish you before you come into your full expression, because on some level, they sense what you will be when you do. And I know that sounds mystical, and I know your rational mind wants to find a more grounded explanation. But think about it honestly. You have been in rooms with people who have treated you with a hostility that your actual behavior did not earn. You have been excluded from circles that had no logical reason to exclude you. You have had people try to shrink you, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, and there was never a satisfying, rational explanation for it. That is not because you are a victim. That is because you carry something that registers. And this is one of the most important things I can tell you. The opposition was actually confirmation. Every time someone who didn't know you resisted you, they were unwittingly testifying to the reality of what is on your life. Anointing attracts opposition the same way a magnet attracts metal. The strength of the opposition is often proportional to the significance of what is being opposed. The people who tried to stop you, they couldn't. Every attempt to diminish you has failed, even when it didn't feel like it was failing. Even when you walked away from those situations wounded and confused, you kept walking. You kept moving. You kept becoming. You are still here, and they are not a part of your story anymore.
I want to specific now because I think you deserve specificity after so many seasons of vague encouragement that didn't quite touch the real wound. While the silence was happening, while we are lying in at night, wondering why nothing was moving, while we are watching your prayers seems to evaporate before they reach the ceiling, while you were going through the motion of a faith that felt intensely theoretical. Here is what was actually happening on the other side of that silence. God was doing surgery, not the kind you feel. The kind you feel you only understand when you see the result. The kind of surgery that happens in the deepest layers of who you are, where the fears lie that you have never spoken aloud, where the wounds are that you have been building your personality around without realize it, where the false foundation are not would have eventually collapsed under the weight of anything real being built on them. The silence was anesthesia because the kind of work that need to be done in you, in your identity, in your relationship with your own worth, in the deep place where you still believe that love was conditionally and belong had to be earned and significance had to be performed. That work could not be done while you were distracted by the noise of visible progress. It requires silence. It requires a long, sustained, deeply uncomfortable stillness in which you had nothing to hold on to aspect what was actually true about who you were and who God was. And in that stillness, things not disclosed, the version of yourself that needed the approval of certain people to feeling legitimate, that got loose from you in the silence. The belief that your worth was tied to your output, your productivity, your visible accomplishment that got accepted in the silence. The terror of being seen and rejected, of being known and found wanting, that got exposed in the silence, both in the light where it could be dealt with, not so that you would never feel it again, but so that it would no longer have the power to run you. The emerge from the silence, you are still emerging, lighter than you know, more solid than you feel, more ready than you believe. The things that used to be able to you to stop you, the fear of what people think, the terror of failure, the compulsive need for external validation. Those things still have a voice inside you, but they don't have the some authority they used to. And you know that if you are honest with yourself, something has shifted, something is different. You are not who you were then the silence start. This is not nothing, that is everything.